Things will undoubtedly get worse, but will it be in the way that you imagine? Is there any way you can realistically prepare for what's coming next? And do we really have time to prepare? Let's talk about it. If you're new to this channel, my name is Chris, and on this channel we discuss emergency preparedness, aka prepping. Now, the point of this video is not to scare, but rather to give you a realistic assessment of where things are at and to hopefully provide you with solutions. On this channel, I don't like to do videos for the sake of just telling the problems, but I always try to wrap everything within the context of acknowledging what's wrong, but yet providing real viable solutions that you can implement on a daily basis. And I've been getting a lot of emails and I read the comments on my videos, and there's always this sense of worry about some major, what in our community is called SHTF, some impending cataclysmic event that's going to be a tipping point where something is going to happen and everything just precipitously falls down, and we see this event. And I think that's what a lot of people are looking for, is what is going to be that singular moment when everything just falls apart. And I think it's a lot different than what you probably imagine, and we'll talk about this and I'll give supporting points. But we'll talk at the end of the video about what a tipping point would look like when we've actually reached that, where I think you see us going into what we would consider an SHTF event. But before we jump into this video, if you'd be so kind to go down to the comments and the description section below, I'll pin a comment, or rather a link to a survey. I announced it last week on my channel, and it's just a survey that basically is allowing us to make sure that we understand what's important to the community, and we're going to really shape our content over the next several months based on your feedback. So it only takes a few minutes and it would help the channel a lot. I think it's worth noting the typical stages that any society will go through. Depending on which study you look at, they usually have similar characteristics of starting off in what some would call a pioneer phase, and typically ending in an age of decadence where society will more or less implode on itself. And when you begin to look at these studies and you see the parallels of what's happening in our own nation and other nations, developed nations around the world, the similarities are, well, they're pretty obvious. And I'm not, again, someone that fixates on the end of the world. That's not really my mindset. I'm what I would consider more of a realist. I'm pretty pragmatic. I look as best I can at what is happening around me, and I try to position myself to be prepared for whatever may come. And the other thing that's very unique about the time that we live in is we are in full transition into what is considered the information age. My parents, what they went through was kind of classic in, more or less an industrial age lifestyle or mindset, where you went to work, you did your 9 to 5, you clocked in, you retired with dignity. And now we live in a time where things are changing very quickly. And I think it's very hard for people to grapple with what's happening. It's causing a lot of uncertainty, which I think is driving many people to want to understand how to be prepared, more self-sufficient. And all that to say, instead of focusing on these big issues that are out of control, or rather out of your control, what you can actually do, what I always try to do personally, and what I hope I do with this channel, is pivot toward what we can focus on that you actually have control over. Getting these items addressed will always put you far ahead. I would argue that these things that I'm going to go through definitely signify challenges that we face, but they're all within the realm of you being able to take steps to make sure that you're addressing these items. And the first one is health. And I know we often talk about this in the community, probably not enough, but within the United States, obesity is a major problem. We're considered in an obesity epidemic at this moment. There was a recent report that came out that showed the number of states with high obesity rates, they nearly doubled since 2018. And for me, if you go back and look at some of my videos last summer, I'll admit during the lockdown, I started, kind of putting on some weight. I was getting up to, 185, 187. I think that's kind of a lot for my frame. I'm 5'7", I'm not a tall guy, and it was a little more weight than I wanted to carry. And so what I've tried to do is I've tried to pivot toward focusing on eating whole foods. I'm currently training for a marathon. I'm trying to take steps and unfortunately getting my weight down. I'm now down to about 175, 173, and I hope to continue over the next 6 to 9 months, continue to drop that. But all that to say, health is crucial. And in this community, we often focus on, gear or skills, and those are all important. But at the end of the day, if there is a disaster and you're either overweight, out of shape, And you will now have to rise to the occasion to address, or these situations. You're going to probably have to do a lot of physical labor. For most people, that is just not going to happen. You're not going to go from a time of a sedentary lifestyle to all of a sudden, rising up in a moment and being able to, physically work in a way that you're not used to. For me, that is probably one of the areas that I think is most important within this community and probably not often discussed enough. The next one that we'll talk about is a devaluation of the dollar. People in this community are clearly concerned about the financial well-being of our nation, and rightfully so. At the moment, the Fed is printing money at an out-of-control rate. One of the things that's being debated right now within politics is, do we raise the debt ceiling? And every time the debt ceiling gets raised, Feds keep printing, the value of the dollar is just eroding. The power of the dollar keeps going down and down. You'll notice this when you go to the store. Every time if you were to, I'm sure, compare what you buy now compared to what you buy last year, you're probably paying, depending on what you're buying, 20, 25% potentially more, especially if you buy meat. And the stock market is up. And it's challenging because you look and you say, well, the stock market's up, but everything else is up as well, so did I really gain anything? And this is where we're moving, and again, I'm not an economist, but the best I can see, it feels like, and it looks like, that we're moving through a very inflationary phase of our, of our society, at least in our economy. And of course, the question comes up: is everything going to crash? And I know for many in this community, there's a big concern. And YouTube shows me the analytics of other channels that viewers watch on my channel, and I'll often go and look and just, curious what the other channels are or who they are, what they're saying, because it helps me understand your concerns. And a lot of these channels that I go and look at, there's always this sense of impending doom. It's going to crash. The economy's going to crash. The housing market's going to crash. A lot of doom and gloom. And I think personally, and again, take it for what it's worth, I wouldn't run to the bank with this, but I think what's coming is probably worse. I think we're seeing and will continue to see inflation rise. And the best I can tell is that the Feds are continuing to prop up these different sectors, whether it's the stock market, the real estate market. We're seeing, if you were to Google, for example, Blackstone, what they're doing with real estate. A lot of these corporations are coming in and they're buying up these homes in typical suburbia because they realize that these assets produce a good solid revenue and they continue to climb in value. So for me, I'm saying all this because you're like, where are you going with all this? My concern is not always, is everything going to collapse? My concern is that we will continue to see inflation and potentially through our life rise. And that's why, for me, I'm trying to understand, what do I do financially to get my fiscal house in order? And that brings us down to the point of what you can do is learn to budget, learn to find ways to increase your income. And to me, I look at finances from a defense, which I would say budgeting, and then an offense position where offensively what I mean by is going out, finding ways to increase my income, finding other revenue streams. So without belaboring the point of finances, the next point I would bring up, and again, I think what we're seeing is at least in my generation, is a loss of practical skills, the ability to do things that previous generations, it was just second nature. And I always have to tell my kids this, that there's a big difference between watching a YouTube video explaining how to do something and actually being able to actually do it. And I say this because on the channel, we're trying to introduce more practical, hands-on type of videos. If you've noticed, we've been trying to roll out a weekly video explaining, how to ferment, how to, make beef jerky, all these different things that are hopefully skill sets that you can gain, that you can practically go out and do. And I would encourage you to do so. Again, it would be easy to say, oh, I've seen the guy do it on YouTube, so I know how to do it. There's a big difference. And my encouragement to you on this point is learn to do as much as you can. We put in a garden this year and my wife took it over and it's just been amazing. It took off. And while I realize that there's no way to be fully prepared, I can't go out there and learn every skill. I have chosen, at least within our home, we've found certain skills that we're good at. And that's why community is so key, is that you may be good at one thing, but your neighbor may be good at fixing cars. And that's why I always encourage people, find relationships. And again, it doesn't have to come down to, oh, this guy's a prepper, and so now we're both preppers. Just get to know people that have skill sets that can bring value. And we are working behind the scenes on some different things to bring to the website to help build community, and we'll be rolling that out here hopefully pretty soon. Then the last point I'll bring up is the just-in-time supply chain. Obviously, if you watch my channel, other channels like Canadian Prepper did a great video here recently. I'll link to it in the cards above, where he showed some of the things that he's seeing on his, in his own store, real things that are happening, vendors that he works with that are having to tell him inventory is going to be in short supply pretty soon. And all that to say, I think it's important that people learn to focus on preps that are important now, the needs versus the wants. Yeah, I'd love to go out and buy more electronics. There's always gadgets that I want to get. But at this point, what I've tried to do is position us in our home financially to begin to invest in assets that are important. More food. There's some different supplies that I think are going to be very important for this winter. And let me answer this question that I talked about at the beginning. What would a tipping point look like in our nation? I don't know if we're quite there yet. Again, there's things that I see that are concerning to me, but I think there will be indicators when we get to that point. There's a quote that I'll give you from an investigative journalist in the late 1890s. His name was Alfred Henry Lewis. And he wrote this, and I thought it was really well said. And to me, I think it kind of defines what a tipping point would look like. And he said this, he said, "Those of us who are well-fed, well-garmented, and well-ordered ought not to forget that necessity makes frequently the root of crime. It is well for us to recollect that even in our own law-abiding, not to say virtuous cases, the only barrier between us and anarchy is the last 9 meals we've had. It may be taken as axiomatic that a starving man is never a good citizen. With this in our mind, what shall be said of the man who arranges famine, who forces a labor strike with its privation, its rioting, its disorder, its bayonet thrusting, and its bloodletting as an incident in his money heaping? If necessity breeds crime, what is he who creates the necessity?" And I think that saying in that quote, I think it's pretty insightful to say that once the people that are in power put the rest of us in a position that we are forced into acting out of necessity, what does it say of those individuals that created that situation? And I know for me in this community, there's always a sense of who's pulling the strings behind the scenes. And I won't try to argue that in this video. For me, one of the things that concerns me most is the power that the corporations are getting in our country, their ability to take control over assets, and more and more. And yes, the argument could be made that government continues to overstep their boundaries. I know for many of us that went through September 11th, we watched as a nation, as a government rolled out these different plans to protect us, right? The Patriot Act and so on. But all that to say, I don't think we're at that point yet where we are in a position of necessity per se. I have not turned on the news and seen, on a regular ongoing basis, people in the streets fighting over food because they can't take care of themselves or their family. I think once we get to that point, you might be asking yourself, and I think it's probably a time when you realize we are probably at a tipping point. And I'll probably do a deeper dive video on that in the future. But all that to say, I hope this video at least gives you some realistic insight into taking concepts that are out there that a lot of people are worried about and saying, look, what is in front of us? What do we know that are problems, and what can you actually do? Do you have time to prepare for what may be coming down the path? Yeah, I would say so. But I would encourage you to get busy now. Time is not really on our side at this time. And again, I try to take a optimistic look at the future, but on the flip side, I have to be realistic about what I see coming down the path. All that to say, I'd love to hear your feedback, your thoughts. I know this video is a lot different than my typical video format, but from time to time, I always enjoy at least engaging in these kind of thought piece type of videos to hopefully give you insight and encouragement as you continue to prepare. As always, stay safe out there.